Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a video on the preliminary patch notes for Diablo 3 patch 2.6.4 season 16, the season of Grandeur. Now in this video, we're going to go over the patch notes and we're going to give context to the patch notes because I feel a lot of people have been out of the loop on Diablo 3 for a while. They're seeing this patch, they're reacting a certain way. We're going to add context and then we're going to give criticism where criticism is due. Because here's the thing about criticism. The purpose of criticism is to effectuate change, and you'll be far more effective with a couple strong points of criticism rather than a dozen weak points of criticism that could be individually rebutted quite easily. And in fact, having those weaker points of criticism conflates your argument entirely and weakens your strong points of criticism. So let's dive into the blog post that went up yesterday. Patch 2.6.4 PTR preview, we're skipping from 261 to 264. We're going to have a PTR, a testing phase of only 1 week this time. It's going to start tomorrow, Wednesday, run for a single week. And this patch will have some significant balance changes, so this is highly unusual. Typically, Blizzard gives us several weeks, around a month of testing time, if not more, when we have big balance changes. So this is going to be interesting. This will have a couple effects. First off, I don't believe we're going to have as solved of a meta when we launch into Season 16. I think we're going to have more surprises emerge throughout the season. When I'm going to make my tier lists, they're a lot more likely to be inaccurate than in previous seasons because we don't have enough time to fully figure out everything, and in that regard, I think that's kind of good. It's nice to see some surprises throughout a season. It's nice to not burn out on a season before the season even launches because everything has been figured out. If you look at Path of Exile, for instance, they don't have any kind of PTR at all. They just launch their new season, their new league, and then within the first week, they'll fix any issues that emerge. They're very quick to reply. I think in the case of Blizzard, I think a short PTR is something that might be a good direction. We'll see how it plays out. So diving into the notes themselves, we're getting 5 additional armory tabs. Great. Greater Rift Keystones will now be in the Materials tab. Great. Primal Legendaries are now marked by a red beam when they drop. That's interesting. That's something that has been proposed by members of the community. I believe Big Daddy Den was one champion for this cause. So you'll have the red beam. On your minimap, you're going to see a red pentagram, and they're now going to have a red border and an updated background. Now, something that I've complained about in Diablo 3 is that we've arrived at a point where it is not exciting to find legendary items anymore. Those beams, there are so many of them, they're so frequent, that I personally don't get excited anymore. I mean, I guess during leveling 1 to 70, yes, but once you hit the meat of the game, it's no longer exciting to see those god beams. In the past, when legendaries were more rare, they were exciting. So now having a red beam, I think, will bring that excitement back. When a legendary drops, it's a 1 in 400 chance for it to be a primal. That is a very rare occurrence, and right now, when you get a primal, the experience is basically you get a legendary like any other, you're just as bored as any other until you mouse over it and you see it's a primal and then instant excitement. However, now, we're going to prolong that feeling of excitement. It's going to play at the psychology of things. You're going to see the beam, you're going to get excited, and then you're going to have more seconds of excitement as you're figuring out what is the item exactly. And then if you realize this is an item that I need, you're prolonging that excitement, you're going to identify the item, you're again prolonging the excitement as it's being identified, and you're waiting, you're anticipating, is it going to have the right stats? And then you get that final moment of, yes, it has the right stats, I'm ecstatic, or no, it does not, and, well, guess I gotta salvage it. One of the core draws of the Diablo series has been loot, has been getting those drops. And anything that helps make that experience more exciting makes the game more fun. Alright, on to changes to Greater Rifts. The gameplay of micromanaging Paragon points during the course of a Greater Rift doesn't feel like especially engaging gameplay, nor was it consistent with the other existing rules of entering a Greater Rift. Paragon points can no longer be swapped while a Greater Rift is open. Now, I brought this up as a proposed suggestion a year or two ago. I mentioned this in a video, and I remember there was a couple people, or at least one very vocal person, that was completely opposed to the idea of not being able to add your Paragon points as you're playing through a Greater Rift, and I was very perplexed by this, because to me, the purpose of a Greater Rift is you get snapshotted when you open it, you do the Greater Rift, and it's supposed to be a reflection of your strength at that moment of opening the Greater Rift with no further modification. And the reason I proposed it was more of a solution to a problem wherein players were using macros to swap their Paragon points from Vitality to main stat. Yes, it was for the Necromancer Corpse Lance builds that have a long period of cooldown. They have a 10-second damage window, and then 30 to 60 seconds of doing nothing. So players would set up macros to just, with a click, swap all their Paragon points into toughness, and then back into damage. I believe this is a good change. It's going to stop that from happening. As a consequence, it will affect particularly hardcore players, people that were doing this manually. There's sort of going to be collateral damage, unfortunately. However, it has to be agreed that the spirit of a Greater Rift really isn't to be playing around with your Paragon points. You can't play around with your skills or your gear or anything else. It doesn't really make sense to be able to play around with your Paragon. Alright, let's get on to the seasonal buff. Season 16, the Season of Grandeur. Now, earlier in the patch notes, they called this a game-breaking seasonal buff. So that's a high bar to set. And what this buff does is it gives all seasonal players the legendary power from the Ring of Royal Grandeur. And this buff does not stack with an additional Ring of Royal Grandeur, be it equipped or in Kanai's cube. And unlike previous seasonal buffs, this buff will not apply to non-seasonal players. And for anyone who might not be aware, the Ring of Royal Grandeur reduces the number of items needed for set bonuses by 1. So, in other words, if you have a 6-piece set, instead of wearing all 6 pieces, you wear 5 pieces and a Ring of Royal Grandeur. And this only works with sets of at least 3 pieces, so it doesn't work with 2-piece sets. So first off, I like that this only applies to seasonal players and not non-seasonal players. I think it was okay with the previous 2 seasons applying to non-seasonal players because they were just buffs to drop rates effectively, but if you're going to be toying with mechanics, I believe it is important that non-seasonal players are not affected so that if you do not like the seasonal theme, you have the option of not experiencing it. That said, I don't know that I would describe the seasonal buff as game-breaking. Game-changing? Sure, a little bit. This is the best seasonal theme yet. It's definitely a step in the right direction now. I got pretty demoralized when I saw the second seasonal theme. The first seasonal theme, which was Double Goblins, I thought, okay, they're just laying the groundwork. They don't want to do anything too crazy. And then for future seasons, they'll get a little bit more experimental. And then season 15 was double bounty rewards, and I thought, okay, I guess we're just getting double things from now on. So I'm happy that we're seeing something more experimental. The overall impact of this, we can very briefly analyze here. So this will have an effect on anyone basically using an endgame build. For most endgame builds, whether you are using a Ring of Royal Grandeur in your build or not. So if you are using a Ring of Royal Grandeur already, then you don't have to have that equipped, so you gain an extra jewelry slot. Be it a ring, be it an amulet. So the most common thing you'll likely see here is a convention of elements worked in, which adds up to some more damage. And for builds that don't already use the Ring of Royal Grandeur, it translates into some extra item that they can work into their build. I think is a very, very general estimate across all builds. I think on average we'll see maybe an increase in power of 2 Greater Rift levels across most builds. Some a bit higher maybe, some a bit lower. So this isn't a huge change power-wise. This also likely will not result in any new builds emerging. What it will do is basically allow you to take your existing build and work in a new item. So it slightly changes every build in the game by adding 1 additional item to every build in the game. So, at least there's that. But when I read Game Breaking, and I read Season of Grandeur, and then I started reading Ring of Royal Grandeur, my first thought was, Ring of Royal Grandeur reduces the requirements by 2. In other words, a Ring of Royal Grandeur lets you have only 4 items and gain the benefit of 6. That would have been truly game-breaking. Would it have been a good idea or a bad idea? I don't know, but it would have been insane. It would have thrown everything out the window. New builds would have completely emerged, because now you're going to be mixing all kinds of new sets together. Things would have been absolutely insane. Odds are, one build would probably emerge as the singular best build in the entire game, crushing everything else. So it wouldn't be a good end state to leave the game in, but like for a short season of maybe a month of crazy experiments going on, crazy power, just pure insanity, I think that could be fun. But I don't know. We do have to consider that Switch players have just joined our fold, and it wouldn't be a good idea to immediately slap them with a season of just insanity. Maybe that might not give them the best first impression. And I feel that the Switch release has had an impact on the themes we've previously received, and delaying any further updates to this point. But we'll get more to that in a bit. Onto the other patch notes. When completing a Greater Rift level 70 solo for the first time in a season, a Primal Legendary is guaranteed to drop from the Rift Guardian. I'm generally opposed to things that make it easier to gear up. I feel that it is currently too easy to gear up. I think Haedrig's Gift... I wouldn't want to take it away because I know that a lot of players like having the Haedrig's Gift, but I feel there's not enough time spent getting to your endgame build, and Haedrig's Gift really expedites that process. For a lot of people that's more fun though, so again, I'm not going to argue, but I personally feel that it's too easy to get at least the basic version of your endgame build. I would like to spend a bit more time gearing up, but in the case of a Primal Legendary, the odds of you getting a good one are pretty damn low. That you're going to get a Primal Legendary for your build, you know, even with smart loot, you'll get it for your class, but to get one for your build, pretty damn rare. And, you know, it's a one-time thing. I don't think it's the end of the world. There are some concessions made for casual players, and I think this is a perfectly acceptable one. Alright, let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this now, the balance changes. Now I'm going to read the philosophy bit here. We are taking another tuning pass across all class sets to improve class and set diversity at higher level Greater Rifts. Please note that these values are not final, and we anticipate some adjustments to occur during the course of PTR. So at first glance, we're seeing a lot of huge numbers. For instance, Might of the Earth 6-piece set going from 5,600 to 20,000% damage bonus. Wrath of the Wastes 3,000 to 10,000. Thorns of the Invoker 6-piece, 5,400 to 15,000. People are seeing this, and a lot of people are freaking out. In my opinion, overreacting, because these numbers need to be taken again in context. For instance, let's take the Seeker of Light 6-piece set bonus, which is being increased from 2,000% increased damage to 12,000% increased damage. This means the build will now do 6 times as much damage as it previously did. That's how you have to look at these numbers. It's not the number itself, it's the multiplier. How many times more damage is the build doing now? In this case, it's 6 times more damage. But that still sounds like a lot. 6 times more damage sounds insane, right? Well, we have to put that into further context. What does 6 times more damage really represent? And the best way to measure that is in terms of Greater Rift progress. Roughly every 4.5 Greater Rift levels, monster health doubles. So with every GR, monster health increases. Roughly every 4.5 levels, it doubles. In a practical sense, what that means is if you double your damage, you should be able to rise another 4 to 5 Greater Rift levels. It's a gross approximation. There are a lot of other factors that come into play, but it's the closest approximation that we can run with. In general, the rate limiting factor on how far you can proceed is how much damage you deal, because how much damage you take can be to a large extent mitigated thanks to player skill and luck. Whereas if you just flat out don't deal enough damage, you can't progress any further. So we're seeing buffs to a huge number of sets. And the way a lot of people are seeing this is, well, Blizzard just figured, let's dial up all the numbers, let everyone push higher GRs. I understand why it seems that way, but if you have been following the game, if you're a current player of Diablo 3, if you know what the meta has been, if you know what the best builds have been for the past year, then you'll note that what they're doing is not buffing everyone. They're buffing multiple builds to be on par with the best builds. Now you may know that every season I put out a tier list video on the 40 best builds. Based on the numbers we're seeing right now, doing some quick math, we can make guesses as to how this tier list will change. Again, this is a gross approximation, but what we're basically seeing here is most of the F tier, most of the D tier, most of the C tier, even a good chunk of the B tier builds are being bumped up. A good chunk of it now is concentrated into A tier, with some as well into S tier, and a bit into B tier, and to a lesser extent C tier. Now, there is some concern about some of these builds being buffed to be even stronger than the current strongest build by a significant margin, but again, everything is still subject to change. But if you examine what has been buffed, what has not been buffed, as in the top builds have not been buffed, how much things have been buffed, it's clear that there's an effort being made for this to be a balance patch and not just a buff patch. Unfortunately, buffing is the way Blizzard balances Diablo 3. Now, this was a design decision made quite some time ago. In earlier Diablo 3, Blizzard would buff and nerf about equally. But whenever they would nerf, people would complain. So they figured, well, we're mostly just going to buff from now on, because it's not a competitive game, so who cares if a bit of power creep sets in? At the time, this didn't seem like a terrible idea, but what we've seen now is years and years and years of balance through buffing lead to ridiculous power creep that gives us these 20,000 multipliers that makes people freak out, that makes people wonder, do we need a stat crunch in D3? I believe it is definitely not ideal to be looking at set bonuses and see, oh, I have a 50,000 times multiplier to my damage now. We're dealing with numbers that are beyond the comprehension of most people at a quick glance. What does it mean to deal 50,000% more damage? 100% more damage, okay, we're doubling our damage. 50,000, it becomes a concept very difficult to grasp. We're dealing with numbers that are just way too big. And again, it wasn't always like that, but this is the consequence of a design decision made a long time ago, and at this point, it's difficult to break from that habit. This is where we've arrived, and without some major changes and overhauls, this is where things have to keep being. I personally believe that a mixture of buffing and nerfing is probably the best thing to do to balance a game. You can maybe lean a little bit heavier on the buffs than the nerfs. Now you may be wondering if this is a balance patch, why is all the balance happening through set bonuses? Well, this is another design decision that I don't agree with, but it's where we've arrived. It's where the past couple years, or few years of Diablo development have taken us, but sets are the endgame. You basically can't have an endgame capable build without running one of the 6-piece sets. Although now with the buffs to Legacy of Nightmares, we'll see the reemergence of some Legacy of Nightmares builds being viable, particularly at T13. We're probably going to see a lot of very viable T13 Legacy of Nightmares builds, but ultimately since the 6-piece sets are so mandatory, it's easier to buff the set bonuses than it is to buff the skills or supporting items or anything else. I wish 6-piece sets weren't the entirety of the endgame. I feel that having effectively half of your item slots locked behind a 6-piece set to be highly limiting in how much you can customize your character. It highly reduces your choice, because now, well, this is half my equipment slots that I have no choice over what to take. They all have to be the same set. You know, I see complaints from people saying, oh, the game is getting too easy now, and I just don't see it that way. Is T13 going to be easier now? Yes. But T13 is already not difficult. To me, T13 isn't about having the strongest build that can do the most damage, it's about having the build that can do the most damage to clear T13 while maximizing your speed as much as possible. So, this doesn't really change anything very much. T13 will be easier to do, yes, but the point of T13 isn't for it to be a real challenge, it's to be a challenge to do quickly. Where the real difficulty lies in this game is in the Greater Rifts. That's where you really challenge yourself with a full-on build designed not for speed, but for pure power. And that's not getting any easier. Yeah, most builds now will be able to push higher Greater Rifts, but so what? We're not capping out yet. The highest GR in the game available is 150. So as long as we're under that, while Greater Rift 100 is getting easier, you're still going to reach a GR level where you're going to get that same amount of difficulty. People that wanted to challenge themselves to do the highest GR, let's say around a 130, were already doing that on the best builds, so now they just have more options as to what builds they can try to beat that highest GR. So as someone who has been playing Diablo 3 since launch 6 years ago, without ever really taking a break except for 1 month off at some point, I am cool with these balance changes. Would I rather it be buffs and nerfs? Yes, but I think that these buffs are going to take things into a better state of balance. I am pleased with these changes. I am pleased that the meta is going to change. The best builds are going to change because we've had a couple seasons now where it's just the same builds are always the top builds, and that gets boring. So to see something shake up, I'm pleased with this. You might ask, why wasn't the Necromancer buffed? Because one very big problem for a lot of top players, that does not include myself, but the people that really grind this game at the highest levels, the most effective thing to do in the game is something called rat runs. It is a 4-player speedrunning composition where you have 1 support Barbarian, 1 support Necromancer, and 2 Rothma DPS Necromancers. You do runs in under 2 minutes, GR in the 90s and the 100s. You get crazy fast Paragon, crazy fast everything, and that's just people do day in, day out. That's what they've been doing for the past year. So not only is Necromancer taking 3 of the 4 spots in the speed group meta, even in the pushing meta, it takes 1 of the spots as a Rift Guardian killer, and it's also one of the best solo pushing builds. So overall, Necromancer is just way too good at too many things, so to see it not really get buffed, I think is okay. But again, we'll have to see how things play out in practice. It's possible this will have no effect on rat runs. We'll have to see. But what's most important, I feel, for the people that have been playing Diablo on a daily or weekly basis for the past year, is to just have some change. So from that perspective, this patch is good. I could understand that if you've stopped playing Diablo 3, this patch isn't going to bring you back. A lot of people are saying there's no content in this patch. I agree, there's no content in this patch. We haven't gotten a content patch since the Necromancer. Would I love to have a content patch? Absolutely yes. Does Path of Exile get massive content patches? Absolutely, and that's awesome. But again, as someone who is a Diablo 3 player and has been for 6 years, I was expecting less than this. I was expecting nothing. So I'm just glad to have something different going on in this next season. And I know some people are thinking, Blizzard just cobbled this together in a week since the whole Diablo Immortal thing. And to that, I point to the fact that community manager Brandy was, during BlizzCon on my stream, hinting heavily at this patch coming up, that they wanted to have it ready for BlizzCon, it had to be pushed back. So this is clearly something that has been in the works for some time, and community manager Lashes has more recently come out and said that it's been in the work for, she first said several months, but she clarified again only a few months. And I'm sure that the launch of the Switch version kind of delayed things. I'd still like to see a much more game-breaking seasonal theme in the future, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. We're now in the right ballpark, I feel. So that's basically the rundown on things. In short, this patch will be changing which are the best builds for next season. The seasonal buff will have a small effect on every build. Every build is going to get 1 additional item, basically. And while, yes, I would definitely prefer to have content patches, I'm happy with at least getting a refresher every season or 2 that shifts things around. This is a good patch if you're someone who still plays Diablo 3. If you're someone that gave up on the game a long time ago, this patch won't bring you back. And that's going to wrap up this video, but do stay tuned for future videos in which we'll take a closer look at the balance changes. We're going to be testing things on the PTR, and we got more videos coming up on other games as well. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. We've got a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.